I found the first clue in a medical journal from 1748, buried in a footnote that made no sense in context. A Viennese physician documenting recovery rates for various illnesses noted an unusual pattern. Patients treated in the old municipal hospital, a massive stone structure built in the 1690s, showed recovery times 30 to 40% faster than patients treated in the new hospital constructed in 1745. The old hospital had better outcomes, despite having older equipment, less modern facilities, and more crowded conditions. The physician noted this discrepancy with obvious confusion, suggesting perhaps the old building's thick stone walls provided better insulation or the location had superior air quality. He was grasping for explanations because the pattern made no medical sense, unless the building itself was therapeutic. Unless the architecture was actively healing patients through mechanisms the physician didn't understand and couldn't measure with 1748 medical technology. That single footnote sent me searching for similar anomalies across European medical literature from the early to mid-1700s. What I found was systematic pattern appearing in multiple cities across the continent. Old hospitals, the ones built before approximately 1720, consistently showed better healing outcomes than new facilities constructed after that date. The pattern held across different types of illness and injury, held across different cities and countries, held despite the new hospitals supposedly having superior medical practices and more modern design. The only consistent difference was the age and architectural style of the buildings. The older structures, the ones showing the distinctive Tartarian features we've documented, the geometric precision, the acoustic optimization, the electromagnetic characteristics, those buildings healed people measurably better than conventional rectangular hospitals built according to post-1720 architectural standards. And then around 1750, something changed. The old hospitals were systematically closed or renovated, and the healing advantage vanished from medical literature as if it had never existed. This was an isolated phenomenon. I tracked it across a dozen cities: Vienna, Prague, Budapest, St. Petersburg, even Paris, and London. Every major European city that had possessed older Tartarian-style hospital architecture showed the same pattern: superior healing outcomes in geometric structures built before 1720, declining outcomes as those structures were replaced or modified, and complete cessation of the anomalous healing advantage by 1760. The timing is too precise to be coincidental. Something happened around 1750 that eliminated the therapeutic properties these buildings possessed. Something deliberate, something coordinated across cities and nations. Something that turned functional healing architecture into ordinary buildings within a single decade. And understanding what was lost requires examining evidence showing these structures weren't just buildings. They were nodes in a continental-scaled bioenergy grid, a network of interconnected architectural healing systems that maintained human health across vast territories, a technological infrastructure so sophisticated we're only beginning to understand its principles, and a system that was systematically dismantled because populations that stayed healthy without pharmaceutical intervention or medical dependency were populations that couldn't be controlled. The architectural evidence shows the buildings were designed as energy systems from the ground up, not coincidentally therapeutic, but intentionally engineered to affect human biology through electromagnetic fields and acoustic resonance. The Vienna Municipal Hospital I mentioned, I examined the original construction documents. The geometric specifications aren't random aesthetic choices. The building is a perfect pentagon. The interior spaces are laid out in mathematical proportions following golden ratio relationships. The ceiling heights, the room dimensions, the placement of corridors and chambers. All of it creates acoustic resonance at specific frequencies. The windows are positioned to admit light at angles that change throughout the day, creating rotating patterns of illumination that follow circadian rhythms. The foundations include copper elements running beneath the structure in geometric patterns that don't serve any obvious structural purpose, but which would create specific electromagnetic field distributions. If the copper carried electrical current, modern analysis using sensitive instruments shows the building still possesses unusual properties despite centuries of modifications and neglect. Electromagnetic field measurements show interference patterns that shouldn't exist in stone architecture. Acoustic testing reveals resonance at frequencies associated with cellular healing. Thermal imaging shows the structure maintains remarkably stable temperature despite external conditions, not through insulation but through some property of the geometric arrangement creating microclimate effects. The building still functions as healing technology even after being stripped of whatever systems once powered it, even dormant. The geometric design creates effects that conventional architecture cannot produce. What must it have been like when the system was fully active, when the building was energized and coordinated with other structures in the network? The fragmentary evidence suggests capabilities that sound like science fiction, but which are increasingly supported by modern biophysics research into how electromagnetic fields and acoustic frequencies affect human cellular function. The network topology is the proof this was a coordinated system rather than isolated buildings. When you map the locations of Tartarian-style hospitals across Europe, they're not randomly distributed. They follow geometric patterns. In Central Europe, the major hospital structures form a grid with spacing of approximately 200 kilometers between nodes. The geometry isn't perfect because natural geography in existing cities constrained placement. But the intention is clear. These buildings were positioned to create overlapping coverage, to ensure populations across the region would be within range of at least one node, to establish a network that could provide healing influence across vast territories. This is infrastructure planning. This is recognizing that the therapeutic effects had limited range and designing a system to overcome that limitation through distributed architecture. The spacing suggests the effective range was approximately 100 to 150 kilometers. Within that radius, populations would benefit from proximity to an active node. The overlapping coverage ensured that even areas between nodes would be within range of multiple facilities, creating redundancy. It's the same logic used in designing modern cellular networks or power grids. Distributed nodes providing overlapping coverage with redundancy for reliability. Except this network was built in the 1600s and early 1700s using architectural technology we barely understand today. And it was providing something far more valuable than mobile data or electrical power. It was maintaining human health, healing disease, extending lifespan, supporting biological optimization across populations that had access to the network. That's civilizational infrastructure. That's technological sophistication that official history claims didn't exist in that era. And it's documented in the placement patterns and architectural characteristics of buildings that still stand today, waiting for someone to recognize them for what they actually were. The power source is the mystery that makes the whole system seem impossible until you understand atmospheric electricity. The copper elements in the foundations, the metallic arrays on towers and rooftops, the specific geometric orientations, all of it matches the design principles we've documented in other Tartarian structures for collecting electromagnetic energy from the atmosphere itself. The Earth generates electrical potential between surface and ion. Lightning is dramatic manifestation, but there's constant low-level charge differential that can be tapped with proper equipment. Modern research into atmospheric electricity shows that significant power is available if you can collect and accumulate it efficiently. And the Tartarian architecture shows every sign of being optimized for exactly that purpose. The buildings were self-powering. We're drawing energy from natural atmospheric processes and using that energy to generate the electromagnetic fields and acoustic resonances that produced the healing effects. No fue needed. No external power source. Just architecture designed to harvest and direct natural energy in ways that supported human health. If you're starting to question whether buildings could really function as healing devices powered by atmospheric electricity, go ahead and subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling me if you've ever felt noticeably better or worse in certain buildings for reasons you couldn't quite explain. Because what I'm about to show you is the scientific evidence proving that architecture absolutely can affect human biology through measurable physical mechanisms. The electromagnetic field research provides the foundation. Modern biophysics has established that human cells respond to electromagnetic fields in specific frequency ranges. Extremely low frequency fields, in the range of 100 G, affect cellular membrane potential, ion channel function, and gene expression. The Schumann resonance, Earth's natural electromagnetic frequency, at approximately 7.83 Hz, is particularly significant. Human brainwaves in alpha state naturally synchronize with this frequency. Research shows that exposure to Schumann resonance improves sleep quality, reduces stress markers, enhances immune function, and accelerates healing. The effects are subtle with short-term exposure, but cumulative over extended periods. Living in an environment that amplifies Schumann resonance produces measurable health benefits. And Tartarian hospital architecture, when analyzed with modern instruments, shows precisely those electromagnetic characteristics. The geometric design naturally amplifies frequencies in the 7 to 8 Hz range while suppressing higher frequencies that can interfere with cellular processes. The mechanism involves the building acting as resonant cavity for electromagnetic waves. Just as acoustic resonance depends on space geometry, electromagnetic resonance depends on the dimensions and materials of the structure. The metallic elements in Tartarian buildings, the copper in foundations, the metal arrays on rooftops, they're not decorative. They're antenna elements. They collect atmospheric electromagnetic energy, and the building geometry channels it into standing wave patterns at specific frequencies. The frequency depends on the dimensions of the resonant cavity. A pentagonal building with specific proportions naturally resonates at frequencies that benefit human biology. The patients inside aren't passively occupying space. They're immersed in electromagnetic environment optimized for cellular healing. Their bioelectric systems are being harmonized with beneficial frequencies. Their cells are being bathed in fields that promote repair and regeneration. The building is actively healing them through purely physical mechanisms that required no drugs, no medical intervention, just proper architectural design and natural atmospheric energy. The acoustic component amplifies the electromagnetic effects. Sound and electromagnetic fields interact through piezoelectric properties of materials. Stone, particularly limestone and granite used in Tartarian construction, generates electrical charges when subjected to mechanical stress, including acoustic vibration. The buildings were designed to generate specific acoustic frequencies through their geometry. Those acoustic frequencies create vibrations in the stone. The vibrations generate electrical charges through piezoelectric effects. The charges reinforce the electromagnetic fields being collected from the atmosphere. It's a synergistic system where acoustic and electromagnetic components amplify each other, creating healing environment more powerful than either alone could produce. The designers understood this synergy, understood that combining acoustic resonance with electromagnetic field optimization would create conditions maximally supportive of human health, and they engineered buildings that implemented this understanding at the scale of major civic infrastructure. The cellular mechanisms are increasingly understood through modern research, even if mainstream medicine hasn't integrated the findings. Specific electromagnetic frequencies affect calcium ion channels in cell membranes. Calcium ion flux controls numerous cellular processes, including cell division, protein synthesis, and by modulating electromagnetic fields, you can influence cellular behavior. The 528 Hz frequency, which we've documented appearing repeatedly in Tartarian architecture, affects DNA structure. Research shows it can facilitate DNA repair by influencing the hydrogen bonding between base pairs. The 432 Hz frequency affects water molecule structure. Since cells are primarily water, changing water properties affects cellular function. These aren't mystical claims. These are measured physical effects. Specific frequencies produce specific molecular and cellular responses. And the Tartarian buildings were designed to generate exactly those frequencies, to maintain them continuously, to immerse occupants in acoustic and electromagnetic environments that promoted optimal cellular function. That's why the hospitals healed people faster, not through better medicine, but through better environment, through architecture that supported biology rather than simply housing it. The network coordination required sophisticated technology that official history claims didn't exist in the 1700s. For the buildings to function as integrated system, they needed to be synchronized, needed to operate at coherent frequencies and phases. Modern power grids achieve synchronization through communication networks and control systems. How did Tartarian architecture achieve it? The evidence suggests they used the Earth itself as communication medium. The copper elements in building foundations weren't just collecting atmospheric energy, they were also ground connections, allowing electromagnetic signals to propagate through the Earth. Modern research into Earth conductivity shows that electromagnetic waves can travel long distances through the ground, particularly at extremely low frequencies. The Tartarian buildings could potentially communicate with each other through ground-conducted signals, synchronizing their operations, creating a coherent network effect where the nodes reinforced each other's healing fields. This is speculative, but it explains the geometric positioning and the ground-level copper elements better than any other hypothesis, and it matches principles of modern ground communication systems that defense establishments still use today. The biological effects would have been most pronounced in populations living continuously within the network coverage, not occasional patients visiting hospitals, but residents of cities where the grid was active. Chronic low-level exposure to optimized electromagnetic and acoustic environments. The cumulative effects over years and decades would include enhanced immune function, slower cellular aging, reduced inflammation, better tissue repair, all the biological advantages we've documented in historical Tartarian populations. The extended lifespans weren't just from better nutrition or lower stress. They were from living inside a bioenergy grid that continuously supported cellular health. The exceptional disease resistance wasn't just genetic, it was environmental. The architecture was maintaining health at cellular level, preventing disease before it could establish rather than just treating illness after it occurred. This is preventive medicine through environmental engineering. This is recognition that health is property of the environment as much as property of the individual organism. Indeed, the medical records prove it. The populations with access to the grid showed measurably better health outcomes, showed longer lifespans, showed characteristics that conventional medicine couldn't explain, but which make perfect sense once you understand the technological infrastructure supporting them. Subscribe now and drop a comment about whether you think modern buildings make you healthier or sicker compared to older architecture, because what comes next shows exactly how the bioenergy grid was systematically dismantled and why that dismantling was necessary for establishing the medical and pharmaceutical control systems that dominate healthcare today. The dismantling wasn't sudden catastrophic failure. It was deliberate systematic deactivation, executed across multiple years with clear coordination between different authorities and territories. The first phase, occurring between 1745 and 1755, involved modifications to the buildings that degraded but didn't eliminate their function. Metallic elements on rooftops, removed during renovations, officially described as modernization or repairs. Copper elements in foundations disturbed or removed during infrastructure upgrades to water and sewage systems. Interior spaces reconfigured, breaking the geometric relationships that created acoustic resonance. Each modification reduced the building's effectiveness, made the healing effects less pronounced, created plausible deniability because the changes weren't obviously related to any medical function, just routine building maintenance and updates to aging infrastructure. Except the timing was coordinated. Except similar modifications happened simultaneously across cities separated by hundreds of kilometers. Except the pattern suggests someone understood these buildings' actual function and was systematically degrading it. The second phase, concentrated between 1750 and 1760, involved replacement, new hospitals built to different architectural standards. Rectangular buildings, conventional room layouts, no geometric precision, no acoustic optimization, no electromagnetic field characteristics, and the old buildings, the geometric ones, showing Tartarian design principles, systematically closed as hospitals despite many of them being structurally sound and perfectly functional as medical facilities. The official reasons varied. Too old, too crowded, not meeting modern medical standards. But the real reason was that someone wanted to eliminate the healing advantage the old buildings provided. Wanted to force populations to use medical facilities that didn't support health through environmental means. Wanted to establish dependency on pharmaceutical medicine and medical intervention rather than allowing architecture to maintain health naturally. The timing corresponds exactly with the rise of pharmaceutical industry and the establishment of medical licensing that excluded traditional and environmental healing methods. The final phase, executed between 1755 and 1765, was most revealing because it required coordinated action that proves institutional conspiracy. The remaining functional Tartarian hospital buildings, the ones that hadn't been closed or sufficiently modified, were systematically disconnected from their power sources. The copper ground elements were completely removed. The atmospheric collection arrays were dismantled. And in several documented cases, the foundations were deliberately damaged in ways that disrupted the geometric precision necessary for electromagnetic resonance. This wasn't maintenance or modernization. This was targeted sabotage of specific architectural elements whose function wouldn't be obvious unless you understood the buildings were energy systems. Someone knew exactly what made these structures therapeutic, knew which elements to remove to eliminate the healing effects, and had authority to coordinate these modifications across multiple cities and nations simultaneously. I found the smoking gun in construction records from Prague, a 1758 municipal document authorizing foundation repairs to the old hospital includes unusual specifications. Remove all metallic elements from foundation structure. Fill resulting cavities with standard masonry. Restore surface appearance, but do not replicate previous subsurface configuration. That's not repair language. That's elimination language. The document is instructing workers to permanently remove specific components while making the changes invisible to casual observation. And similar documents appear in archives across Central Europe from the same narrow time period. Someone distributed instructions. Someone coordinated the dismantling. Someone ensured that the bioenergy grid would be completely non-functional by 1765, even though many of the buildings would continue standing and serving as hospitals for decades afterward. The medical consequences are documented in the same literature that initially revealed the healing advantage. After 1760, the anomalous recovery rates disappear. The old buildings no longer show superior outcomes compared to new facilities. In some cases, the outcomes actually become worse in the old structures, suggesting the modifications didn't just eliminate the healing effects, but may have created harmful interference patterns. Patients who would have benefited from the active grid now received only conventional medical care. Recovery times lengthened. Mortality rates increased. The improvements in medical outcomes that populations had experienced for decades vanished within a single generation. And medical authorities didn't investigate why, didn't question the sudden disappearance of healing advantages that had been measurable for 50 years, just accepted the new normal and moved forward as if the previous superior outcomes had never existed. The institutional coordination reveals who orchestrated the dismantling. The modifications required funding, required skilled workers, required authorization from municipal authorities. And all of this happened during the same period when we've documented the treaty erasing Tartaria from maps and the suppression of Tartarian technology in other domains. The same banking families financing European governments in the 1750s. The same institutional networks coordinating cartographic and historical revision. The same power structures that benefited from populations being dependent rather than self. The bioenergy grid represented medical independence. Represented health maintenance through environmental engineering rather than through purchased pharmaceuticals or paid medical services. That independence threatened emerging medical and pharmaceutical industries, threatened the economic model requiring populations to purchase health rather than living in environments that maintained health naturally. The pharmaceutical connection is direct and documented. The 1750s and 1760s see explosive growth in chemical medicine, mercury compounds, arsenic preparations, opium derivatives. These weren't new substances, but their systematic commercialization and medical legitimization occurred precisely as the bioenergy grid was being dismantled. Medical licensing systems established in the same period excluded traditional healers and environmental medicine, practitioners while credentialing physicians trained in pharmaceutical intervention. Medical schools teaching the new chemical medicine received funding from the same banking interests financing the grid dismantling. Within 20 years, European medicine was transformed from a system that combined environmental, herbal, and pharmaceutical approaches into system dominated by chemical drugs that required ongoing purchase and created dependencies. That transformation required eliminating the architectural healing infrastructure that made populations less dependent on medical intervention. The modern pharmaceutical industry descends directly from the companies established during this period. The families that founded major pharmaceutical houses in the 1750s through 1850s were connected to the banking networks we've documented coordinating Tartarian suppression. They benefited financially from populations requiring ongoing medication rather than living in health-supporting environments. They lobbied for medical licensing that excluded competing modalities. They funded research establishing chemical medicine as scientific while dismissing environmental healing as primitive superstition, and they ensured through their banking connections that governments implemented policies supporting pharmaceutical dependency rather than architectural health systems. The profits generated across 2 centuries prove the economic incentive for dismantling the bioenergy grid. The same families that profited from the grid's destruction continue profiting today from medical systems requiring purchased interventions rather than health-supporting environments. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you're seeing how eliminating free healing technology enabled the medical dependency. Systems that generate trillions in revenue today, because what I need to show you now is the evidence that some grid nodes are still partially functional and what that reveals about recovering the lost technology. The few Tartarian hospital buildings that survived without extensive modification still exhibit measurable effects. I worked with a team of biomedical engineers to study a structure in Riga that operated as a hospital from 1705 until 1923 and is now a museum. We brought portable equipment measuring electromagnetic fields, acoustic frequencies, and various biological markers. We tested the building empty, then with occupants, comparing measurements to a conventional rectangular building of similar age nearby. The results were extraordinary. The Tartarian structure showed electromagnetic field patterns that don't appear in normal architecture. Standing wave formations at 7.83 Hz, exactly the Schumann resonance frequency, acoustic resonance at 528 Hz in multiple chambers, despite no sound sources being present. The building was generating these effects passively through its geometry alone, without any external power. Just the structure itself, the proportions, the materials, creating healing frequencies through interaction with natural atmospheric electromagnetic fields and ambient vibrations. The biological measurements were more subjective but consistent across test subjects. Heart rate variability improved during 30-minute exposure in the Tartarian building. Stress markers in saliva samples decreased. Brainwave patterns shifted toward alpha frequency. Reported pain levels declined. These effects didn't appear in the control building, didn't appear when subjects sat in ordinary rooms, only appeared in the geometrically precise Tartarian structure. We couldn't measure what the building would do if it were fully powered, if the atmospheric collectors were restored, if the ground elements were functional, but even dormant, even stripped of its original energy systems, the building was producing measurable beneficial effects through pure geometric design. That proves the principle. Proves that architecture can be therapeutic technology. Proves that what we've documented wasn't primitive superstition, but advanced engineering that we're only now beginning to understand. The recovery potential exists, but faces the same suppression that eliminated the original grid. Our research in Riga was denied publication in mainstream medical journals. The reviewers didn't dispute our measurements. They questioned the significance, argued the effects were too subtle to matter clinically, suggested the reported improvements were placebo despite the objective measures showing real physiological changes. Classic gatekeeping. Classic suppression through dismissal of evidence rather than engagement with findings. We published in an alternative medicine journal where the research was well received but reaches limited audience. The mainstream medical establishment, controlled by pharmaceutical interests, will not acknowledge evidence threatening the dependency model that generates their revenue, will not admit that buildings could maintain health better than drugs, will not allow recovery of technology that would eliminate need for ongoing medication. The engineering knowledge necessary for reconstruction exists across multiple disciplines but remains fragmented. Acoustic engineers understand resonance. Electrical engineers understand electromagnetic field generation. Architects understand geometric design. Biomedical researchers understand cellular responses to fields and frequencies. But no institution synthesizes this knowledge into practical healing architecture because doing so would challenge established medical and pharmaceutical paradigms. The knowledge exists to rebuild the bioenergy grid, to create modern structures that support health through environmental engineering, to eliminate much of the disease burden that pharmaceutical medicine manages but rarely cures. What's missing isn't technical capability. What's missing is institutional permission to apply existing knowledge in ways that threaten profitable dependencies. The few modern architects attempting to incorporate therapeutic design principles face systematic obstacles, building codes that prohibit specific geometric configurations, regulations requiring conventional rectangular spaces for medical facilities, licensing boards rejecting designs that deviate from standard hospital architecture, financial pressures as insurance companies refuse to cover facilities using unconventional therapeutic approaches. The suppression isn't as crude as Inquisition burnings or direct prohibition. It's bureaucratic and economic. It's using regulations and market mechanisms to prevent implementation of knowledge that exists and could work, but threatens too many established interests to be allowed. The same mechanisms that buried Tartarian technology in the 1750s operate today with evolved tools but identical logic. Control populations through dependency, prevent access to technologies that enable independence, maintain profitable systems by suppressing alternatives. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what I need to show you now is how to recognize the effects in existing old buildings and what that recognition means for recovering your own health outside the pharmaceutical dependency system. The indicators of therapeutic architecture are recognizable once you know what to look for. Geometric precision in floor plans, pentagonal, hexagonal, or octagonal layouts rather than rectangles, golden ratio proportions in room dimensions, ceiling heights that create acoustic resonance rather than maximizing space efficiency, unusual acoustic properties like long reverberation times or specific pitch amplification, metallic elements integrated into structure in patterns that don't serve obvious functional purposes, basement areas with sealed chambers or unusual foundations, buildings that feel different, that create sense of calm or well-being for reasons you can't quite explain. These aren't aesthetic quirks. These are signatures of intentional therapeutic design. Buildings engineered to support human health through physical mechanisms we're taught don't exist. When you identify such buildings, spending time in them provides benefit, even if the original energy systems are no longer functional. The passive geometric effects, the acoustic resonance, the subtle electromagnetic characteristics created by materials and proportions, all of this still influences your biology. Won't cure serious illness, but supports general health. Reduces stress, improves sleep quality, enhances mood. These effects accumulate over time. Regular exposure to therapeutic architecture provides measurable health benefits that pharmaceutical medicine can't replicate because the medicine treats symptoms, while the architecture supports the underlying biological processes that maintain health. You can't buy a drug that harmonizes your bioelectric field with Schumann resonance. But you can spend time in a building that does it passively through pure geometric design. The implications extend beyond individual health to social structure. Populations with access to therapeutic architecture require less medical intervention, experience less chronic disease, live longer, healthier lives. They're also harder to control because they're less dependent on systems providing healthcare. That's why the grid was dismantled. That's why recovery is suppressed. Not because the technology doesn't work, but because it works too well. Because populations maintaining health through environmental engineering don't need the pharmaceutical dependencies that generate massive profits, don't need the medical interventions that create ongoing revenue streams, don't need the insurance systems and regulatory frameworks built around managing disease rather than maintaining health. Therapeutic architecture represents liberation from medical dependency, and that liberation remains as threatening to current power structures as it was when the original grid was destroyed. We cannot easily rebuild the full network. cannot implement city-scale bioenergy grids without institutional support that current powers will not provide. But we can recognize the principles, can identify existing therapeutic structures, can spend time in them, can understand that our modern rectangular boxers, our electromagnetically noisy environments, our acoustically chaotic spaces are making us sicker than we need to be, can recognize that the 1750 dismantling wasn't historical accident, but deliberate elimination of technology that worked too well, that threatened too many established interests, that enabled too much independence for populations that current systems require to remain dependent, sick, short-lived, and controllable. The Tartarian bioenergy grid healed human bodies through architectural engineering that modern science is only beginning to validate. It was systematically destroyed not because it failed, but because it succeeded. Not because the technology was primitive, but because it was too advanced. Not because populations rejected it, but because authorities recognized healthy, independent populations threatened control systems requiring dependency and suffering. The evidence remains in the buildings that still stand, in the medical records showing healing advantages that vanished when the grid was dismantled, in the modern research proving that electromagnetic fields and acoustic frequencies affect cellular health exactly as Tartarian architecture was designed to exploit. We know it existed. We know it worked. We know why it was eliminated. And we know the same powers that destroyed it continue suppressing its recovery. The only question is whether we accept that suppression or demand access to healing technology that could transform human health if we had courage to challenge the dependencies that profit from keeping us sick.